That was it. That was the exact moment I knew my marriage was over. I'd spent weeks, planning what I truly believed would be the perfect dinner party for my husband and his friends. I never in a million years could have imagined it would end with me discovering a secret that would just shatter my entire world. To really get it, we have to start from the beginning. Mark and I had what I honestly thought was a good marriage. Not a perfect fairy tale marriage. I'm not that naive. I know those don't exist outside of movies. But it was good. It was solid. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5. We had the whole package. The house in the suburbs with a mortgage that was frankly ridiculous, a golden retriever named Gus who was basically a furry person, and a routine that felt comfortable. If we were that couple, you know, the one our friends would point to and say, "See? It can work." And I loved him. I really, truly did. He was a successful architect, already a partner at his firm, and he had this quiet confidence that I'd found so attractive when we first met. He was never the loudest guy in the room, but he had this incredible way of making you feel like you were the only person in it. He was kind, or so I thought. He was my rock, my best friend. The dinner party was my idea, born from this need to do something nice for him. He'd been working insane hours on some huge project, coming home late, looking completely drained. He seemed more distant than usual, and I just chalked it up to stress. My solution for pretty much everything is to feed people, to create a space that's warm and full of laughter. I figured, what better way to help him unwind than to surround him with his oldest friends? The guest list was easy. Mark's 3 best friends from college. His boys, as he called them. There was Leo, the super charismatic one, a successful lawyer who could talk his way into or out of anything. He was married with 2 kids and always had a hilarious story ready to go. Then there was Chris, the wild card. Still single, a freelance graphic designer who seemed to be in a permanent state of figuring his life out. He was loud, sometimes inappropriate, but he had a heart of gold. And finally David. Quiet, observant David. He was a high school history teacher, happily married to his college sweetheart, and the most grounded of the 3. They were a package deal, a brotherhood forged in dorm rooms. I'd always liked them. They felt like my family too. So, I sent out the texts, got excited replies, and circled a Saturday on our calendar. I spent the next 2 weeks planning everything to absolute perfection. The menu was ambitious. A 5-course meal I'd been dying to try. I bought new placemats, new wine glasses. I just wanted it to be special. I wanted Mark to look at me across a table of his happy, well-fed friends and remember how good we were. How good I was to him. The irony of that now is so thick I could choke on it. Looking back, the red flags were there. Course they were. They weren't big, waving banners of warning. They were more like tiny, fluttering ribbons you could easily miss if you weren't looking. And I wasn't looking. Why would I be? In the weeks leading up to the party, Mark's behavior got just a little bit stranger. The late nights at the office became more frequent. He'd come home smelling like the city, that mix of exhaust and stale office air, but sometimes there was something else underneath it. A faint, unfamiliar cologne that wasn't his. When I'd ask about it, he'd just say he'd been in meetings and brush it off. His phone, which used to be basically communal property, left lying around on the kitchen counter, was suddenly always in his pocket or face down on his nightstand. He started taking calls in his home office with the door shut, and if I walked by, his voice would drop to a murmur. If I asked who it was, the answer was always the same clipped response. Just work. There was a shift in his whole energy. He was emotionally distant, withdrawn. Our conversations, which used to be so easy, became stilted, like I was conducting an interview. How was your day? Fine. Anything interesting happen? Nope. It felt like I was talking to a polite stranger. Then, at other times, he'd be almost too nice, bringing me flowers for no reason or telling me I looked beautiful when I was in sweatpants with my hair in a messy bun. It didn't feel like affection. Felt like guilt. I just kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that he was just stressed. I doubled down on my plan for the perfect dinner party, convinced it was the one thing that could fix us. The night of the party finally came, and the house was filled with the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary. I'd been cooking all day, buzzing with a nervous energy that was 1 part excitement, 2 parts desperation. The guests trickled in. David and his wife, Sarah, brought a beautiful bottle of red wine. Chris showed up with a 6-pack of craft beer and a wild story about a disastrous Tinder date. And finally, Leo, looking dapper as ever, holding a bouquet of flowers for me and giving Mark a firm, friendly handshake. At first, the atmosphere was exactly what I'd hoped for. Everyone was laughing, catching up. The wine was flowing. I felt this huge sense of relief wash over me. See, told myself, everything is fine. We all sat down to eat, and the first few courses went off without a hitch. The conversation was light, full of old college stories I'd heard a dozen times but still loved. Mark actually seemed more relaxed than he had in weeks, a real smile on his face. I felt a swell of pride. I did this. I was fixing it. The shift happened somewhere between the main course and dessert. Chris, who had been enthusiastically mixing wine with his beer, was getting louder, a little more sentimental. He started going on about how much he admired their friendship, how they'd all been through so much together. To us, he slurred, raising his glass. The 4 musketeers. Through thick and thin. We've kept each other's secrets for 20 years, boys. There was a weird beat of silence after he said it. A flicker of something, was it panic? Crossed Mark's face. Leo just gave a thin smile and took a slow sip of wine. David suddenly became fascinated by the pattern on his dessert plate. It was a tiny, awkward moment, but it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. What secrets? I asked, trying to laugh it off and break the tension. Come on, after all these years, I'm practically one of the guys. Can handle it. Spill. I was joking. God, I was just making conversation. I had no idea my innocent, throwaway question was the key I was about to turn in a lock I never even knew existed. A lock that would unleash a monster and tear my entire life apart. Chris just grinned, his face all flushed with alcohol. Oh, you know, he said, waving his hand dismissively. The usual college stuff. Like that time Mark swore he'd never fall in love again after. Well, you know. He winked over at Leo. Another one of those weird pauses. The air was practically crackling now. After what? Pressed. My light-hearted tone was gone, replaced by real curiosity. Who broke my husband's heart before I came along? I glanced at Mark, expecting him to laugh it off, to give me a playful, edited version of the story. He didn't laugh. He just stared at his plate, his jaw clenched tight. It's not important, honey. It was a long, long time ago. Leo jumped in, his voice smooth as silk. Chris, you're drunk. Let's not bore the ladies with stories from our sordid past. He tried to change the subject, but it was too late. The seed of unease was already planted. That's when David, who'd been quiet all night, looked up. His eyes met mine with an expression of such profound pity that it made my blood run cold. It wasn't the look of a friend about to share an embarrassing story. It was the look of someone who knew a terrible secret and was watching a train wreck happen in slow motion. No, I want to know, I said, my voice much firmer now. I wasn't playing along anymore. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. Who was she? Chris, completely oblivious to the storm clouds gathering over my head, plowed right on. Oh, it wasn't a she, he said with a little chuckle. That was the whole thing. Mark was so torn up when Alex left. The name just hung there in the air. Alex. I'd never heard that name before. Alex. I repeated, my brow furrowing. Who's Alex? Mark shot Chris a look of pure, murderous rage. Shut up, Chris. But it was too late. Leo let out a quiet, defeated sigh and buried his face in his hands. David just shook his head slowly, looking down at the table. Alex, Chris went on, his drunk brain finally catching up to the damage he was causing, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. Alex. You know, from the study abroad program in Paris. My mind was racing. Mark studied in Paris for a semester. He barely ever talked about it. I always just assumed he was too focused on his architectural studies. I looked at Mark. His face had gone completely white. I don't understand, I said, my voice starting to tremble. What are you talking about? Leo finally looked up, his eyes swimming with a desperate apology. He's talking about me, he said, his voice barely audible over the sudden ringing in my ears. My middle name is Alexander. They all called me Alex in college. The world stopped. Just stopped. The clinking of forks, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own breathing. It all faded away into a dull, roaring static. I looked from Leo, his face a mask of shame, to Mark, who was now staring right at me, his eyes wide with a kind of terror I had never seen before. An affair. Course. The red flags, the distance, the secrecy. It all pointed to an affair. But my mind had never, not in a million years, gone here. My husband and his best friend. His best man. The man whose children called me Auntie. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed into place with brutal, horrifying clarity. The shared glances I'd always written off as camaraderie. The inside jokes that never quite made sense. The way Mark's entire face would light up when Leo walked into a room. A light I hadn't seen pointed at me in years. The cologne. The late-night calls. The secrets. You, I whispered. The word was just a puff of air. I was looking at Mark, but the accusation was for both of them. The tears started to well up, hot and thick. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a demolition. They hadn't just cheated on me. They had built my entire marriage on a foundation of lies. Our life, our home, our friendships. It was all a stage. A carefully constructed set for a play I didn't even know I was in. I shoved my chair back from the table. The screech of the wood on the floor a scream in the dead silence. I stood there, swaying, looking at the horrified faces around me. Sarah's hand clamped over her mouth, David's pained expression, Chris's drunken, dawning horror. And then I looked at the two of them. Mark and Leo. My husband and his lover. The first sob ripped out of my chest, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. And the perfect dinner party, the one I had planned with so much love and hope, was officially over. The silence shattered. The first sound was me, that choked, guttural sob. The second was Mark, his chair scraping the floor as he shot up. Honey, don't, he started, reaching for me. Don't you touch me. I screamed, the words ripping from my throat. I stumbled backward, away from him, away from the table, away from the wreckage of my life laid out on my brand new placemats. The room just erupted. Chris was babbling apologies, a constant stream of, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." David and Sarah were frozen like statues of shock. And Leo just sat there, his head in his hands, the absolute picture of pathetic misery. And Mark was trying to manage the situation. Please just calm down. Let's talk about this. Talk about this. I shrieked, a wild, hysterical laugh bubbling up through my tears. Talk about what, Mark? The 7 years of lies. The fact that my entire marriage has been a complete and utter sham. The part where you've been sleeping with your best friend the whole time. Where should we start? I turned on Leo then, my grief swallowed by a white-hot rage. And you stood up at our wedding. You gave a toast. You held my hand and told me how lucky Mark was to have me. Your wife, your kids. Do they know? Or are they part of this big, elaborate lie too? Leo flinched like I'd slapped him. He couldn't even look at me. The party was done. David and Sarah were the first to make a move, muttering apologies, their eyes avoiding mine as they basically ran out of the house. Chris stumbled out after them, still mumbling, "I'm so sorry." And then it was just the three of us. The architects of this whole disaster. The fight that followed wasn't a conversation. It was an exorcism of years of lies. I yelled until I was hoarse. I cried until I felt hollowed out. I paced the length of our open-plan living room like a caged animal, the beautiful sterile space suddenly feeling like a prison I'd built for myself. Mark's defense was pathetic, A textbook of clichés. It didn't mean anything. I was confused. I didn't want to hurt you. Every excuse was just another shovel of dirt on the grave of our marriage. He tried to claim it was a thing of the past, something from college that had just recently resurfaced. He tried to frame it as a moment of weakness, a series of mistakes. But I saw it for what it really was. It wasn't a mistake. It was a whole other life he was living in the shadows of the one he'd built with me. The most painful part was realizing I wasn't the main character in my own story. I was a supporting role. A beard. The convenient, socially acceptable cover for a truth. He was too much of a coward to live out loud. The final, killing blow came when I asked him, my voice a raw whisper. Did you ever love me? Or was I just part of the act? He couldn't answer. He just stood there, his face crumbling, and in his silence, I got the loudest, most honest answer he had given me all night. Something inside me just snapped. The rage and grief receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I walked right up to him, and for a second I think he thought I was going to hit him. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye. I want you to leave, I said, my voice eerily calm. Get your things. Get out of my house. Honey, this is my house too, he started, a hint of his old authoritative tone creeping back in. No, I cut him off. This was our house. Now it's just a crime scene. And I want you and him. I jerked my head toward Leo, who was still just a pathetic lump at the table. Out of it. Now. Leo finally moved. He stood up, not looking at me, and walked to the door like a man on his way to the gallows. He paused, hand on the knob, and whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice flat. Nothing will ever fix this. He left, and then it was just me and Mark. He started to protest again, to plead, but the look on my face must have told him it was useless. He went upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing echoing in the silent house. 20 minutes later, he came down with a suitcase. He paused at the door, one last, desperate appeal in his eyes. I just shook my head. I didn't have any more words for him. I had nothing left for him at all. He opened the door and walked out of my life. The click of the lock behind him was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there in the silence for I don't know how long, just surrounded by the ruins of my dinner party, the ruins of my life. The journey from that moment to where I am now has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm sharing this because I know I can't be the only one who's felt that gut-wrenching moment of betrayal, that feeling of your entire world tilting off its axis. If you've ever had to walk away from a life you thought would last forever, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if this story helps you feel even a little less alone, don't forget to like and subscribe to follow what happened next. The first few days after are a total blur. I mostly remember the silence. The house was so quiet it felt suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards was a reminder that I was alone. My sweet dog Gus became my shadow. He seemed to sense my grief, resting his head on my lap for hours while I just sat on the couch, staring at nothing. Packing up Mark's things was both torturous and weirdly therapeutic. I moved through our bedroom, my bedroom, with this detached efficiency. I folded his expensive suits, the ones I'd helped him pick out. I gathered the books from his nightstand, the toiletries from his side of the sink. With every single item I put in a cardboard box, it felt like I was physically removing a piece of the lie from my home. I found old photos of us, smiling, looking so happy, and I felt nothing but a hollow ache. Was any of it real? Did I ever really know the man I slept next to for 7 years? Telling people was the hardest part. My parents, my sister, my friends. Every time I had to tell the story, I had to relive the humiliation and the shock. But with each retelling I was met, not with pity, but with this fierce, protective love. My sister came over and threw out every last bit of food from the party, declaring the kitchen a betrayal-free zone. My best friend from college took a week off work just to sit with me, letting me cry, letting me be angry, letting me be silent. They were the scaffolding that held me up when I was sure I was going to collapse. The weeks turned into months. The divorce was surprisingly fast. Mark, maybe out of some shred of decency or, more likely, a desire to make it all just disappear, didn't fight me on anything. Got the house. Got Gus. Got my freedom. I heard through the grapevine that Leo's wife had also left him and took the kids. Their big secret cost them everything. There was a dark, bitter part of me that felt some satisfaction in that, but mostly I just felt tired. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a messy, jagged, looping path. There were days I'd wake up feeling this surge of empowerment, excited for a future that was suddenly a blank canvas, all mine to paint. And then there were days a certain song on the radio or the sight of a couple holding hands would send me spiraling right back into grief. I started seeing a therapist, which was one of the best decisions I ever made. She helped me unpack not just the betrayal, but the years leading up to it. She helped me see all the subtle ways I had made myself smaller to fit into his life, the little compromises on my own dreams that I'd made for his. I realized that my obsession with creating the perfect life, the perfect dinner party, was a symptom of my own insecurity, a desperate attempt to shore up a foundation that was already rotten. And I learned to trust my gut again. For so long, I had silenced that little voice inside me that whispered something was off. I'd explained away his distance and his secrecy. Never again. Now I listen to that voice. It's my most trusted guide. This whole experience, as devastating as it was, broke me open. It forced me to actually look at my own needs, my own desires, my own strength. I started taking a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do. I reconnected with old friends. I started traveling by myself for myself. I discovered that I'm actually pretty good company. I discovered that I am enough, all on my own. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm completely healed, or that I have all the answers. The scars are still there, but they're not gaping wounds anymore. They're just these silvery lines that remind me of what I survived. The dinner party that ended my marriage was the absolute worst night of my life, but in a strange way, it was also the beginning of my real life. It was the night I stopped being a supporting character and finally started to become the main character of my own story. Thank you for being here and for listening. It wasn't easy to share all this, but I really hope that in doing so, someone out there who's feeling lost or broken feels a little less alone. If you want to follow my journey from here, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.